Good afternoon. We gather today for the celebration of life of David Schwardt. I'm the Reverend Sherry Halliday Kwan. I'm the lead minister here at First Unitarian Church of Rochester. This is the place that Dave called his spiritual home for over 60 years. And so we gather now here in this space, a space that he helped build, both physically, but spiritually, emotionally, in community, through meetings, and coming again and again to be in the company of others whom he loved but did not always like. Because that is what it means to be together. And we gather now to make this space sacred, to pay attention, to lift up Dave's life, knowing that death is one of the things in the human experience that comes for all of us. But in this precious time between birth and death, each of us weaves our own pattern. I want to thank you for joining us here or online, and we hold in our hearts all who would like to have been here and cannot. Dave's wife of many years, Sue, is not with us today for her own health. But we send her love, and we know that her story and her thread is intimately woven in alongside Dave's. For us, those left behind, death can leave a hole, an extra place, a wondering. And there are many reminders here in this place and in our lives of the places where Dave moved. I ask you to be gentle with ourselves, with each other, to know that this time, this special time that we've set aside to gather to be in each other's company, is a reminder of something much bigger, of a journey of grief, of recovery from loss, of celebration. And none of us are alone in that. It is good to be together. It is good to be together, to lift up the love and the stories of David's life. And we begin by lighting our chalice. It's a symbol of Unitarian Universalism that we use to help focus ourselves, to mark this time and space. And I'd like to invite David's grandchildren, David and Nikki and John, to come forward to kindle our flame. Our words today are adapted from the Reverend Mira Mikowitz. We light this chalice. We transform fuel into light and warmth. It reminds us of our own living. We transform the stuff of this world into the love and activities of our lives. As we remember Dave, may we bring forward transformation in ourselves, from grief into healing, from memory into wholeness, and from celebration into love. Thank you. Thank you. So we continue with music because the Schwartz's home was one that was always full of music. And for those who know their jazz, I've made a mistake in the program. We continue with I Remember Clifford.
Switch back. Cool.
Our reading today comes from Aaron Freeman. You want a physicist to speak at your funeral. And I'll interject here for just a moment to say that Dave came from a family of scientists, including his father-in-law, who was a physicist. You want a physicist to speak at your funeral. You want the physicist to talk to your grieving family about the conservation of energy, so they will understand that your energy has not died. You want the physicist to remind your sobbing daughter about the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. You want your child to know that all your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that was their beloved remains in this world. You want the physicist to tell your weeping son that amid energies of the cosmos, you gave as good as you got. At one point, you might hope that the physicist will step down from the pulpit and walk to your broken-hearted spouse there in the pew and tell her that all the photons that ever bounced off your face, all the particles whose paths were interrupted by your smile, by the touch of your hair, hundreds of trillions of particles have raced off like children, their ways forever changed by you. And as your widow rocks in the arms of a loving family, a loving community, may the physicist let you know that all the photons that bounced from you were gathered in the particle detectors that are her eyes. Those photons, created within the constellations of electromagnetically charged neurons whose energy will go on forever. And the physicist will remind the congregation, that's you, will remind you how much of all of our energy is given off as heat. There will be a few fanning themselves. And he will tell them, I will tell you, that the warmth that flowed through you is still here, still part of all that we are, even as we mourn the heat of our own lives. You'll want the physicist to explain to those who loved you that they need not have faith exactly. Indeed, they should not have faith. You could measure. Scientists have measured precisely the conservation of energy and found it accurate, verifiable, consistent across space and time. You can hope your family will examine the evidence. You will hope that they are satisfied that the science is sound. We will be comforted to know that your energy is still around. According to the law of conservation of energy, not a bit of you is gone. You're just less orderly. We can feel the warmth of Dave's life and presence here with us. And I offer to you an arc of his life, things that you can hang the snapshots of your experience with him on, and the memories that others will share today. Our task in our gathering is to tell the truth in great love. Our task today is something that Dave lived and did throughout his life. David Schwardt was born in Kansas and moved to Ithaca, where he joined, among other things, a community orchestra as a teen. He happened to have the good fortune of sharing a stand with a woman named Susan, whose fortune was less clear in those moments. Under his breath, David would crack jokes, wordplay, puns, and less subtle, dispositionally, Sue would burst into laughter and get in trouble. Apparently, she didn't hold it against him too much, because the two were eventually married. After graduating with a master's degree in engineering from Cornell, David went on to serve in the Army. But music continued to be a part of his life. His career and his love continued alongside one another. And the two of them, Sue and Dave, moved to Rochester in 1955, where he started a career at Eastman Kodak that lasted over 30 years. And some of you in this room know him through that. Together, Sue and Dave had 4 children: Judy and Jeffrey, Kevin and Ellen, children to whom he was devoted and loved very much. He worked hard during the day, and Sue was the primary parent, but on weekends or when he was on vacation, his parental presence had a vigor that matched his hard-working ethic. You knew when it was time off, because fun was something he took seriously. He brought that love and energy here, too, to this church, where he joined in 1963. He served in many leadership roles, as architecture committee chair, helping to build the expansion of this building, as congregational president, and as the illustrious and unmatched leadership position, High Bi-Fry guy. He led the group of people, mostly guys, who gather bi-weekly on every other Friday and who, by their own description, eat donuts and also do other things. They take care of this building. They take care of each other. And he took care of that group and leadership with intention and play. They had candlelight dinners, lobster dinners on New Year's Eve, always excited to entertain or socialize. He invited people down to their lake on their house on the lake, Auburndale. Loved entertaining so much that even at the end of his life, when they weren't doing much of that, his daughter recounted a time where, getting ready for dinner, he set out 6 glasses for gin and tonics, just in case company swung by, and in his good-natured way, put them away when it was time. He loved so much of life, and in his work, he was creative and committed, with about a dozen patents. But his hobbies of helping not only here at this congregation, but around his house and the house on Canandaigua, but also music and photography and traveling and skiing became things that he was committed to and invited others into. Their family especially loved road trips and skiing, including his young family who learned at the tender age of 3, some of them, To fly down mountains and feel the wind through their hair and feel alive became an important part of who he was and how he understood himself in the world. Later, when he had heart surgery, he found his way back to the world to be slower and more depressing than he would like. His new heart, would it hold? Skiing fixed him right up, brought him back to life. He started walking and continued that in his committed way for the rest of his life. Moving between work and play, he brought a sense of energy and love and discipline. There was a rule when working on projects down at the lake. You must, no matter what, lay down your tools at 6 o'clock. There was more to life than work, but not more than loving. And Dave loved deeply, demonstrating his love for the people and institutions around him by his steady presence and his return again and again to care. He brought that love to care for his daughter Ellen. And when she died, it left a hole and more space also to love in new and different ways. In recent years, when his wife Susan was challenged by declining cognitive and physical health, David became her primary caregiver, a devoted advocate, never complaining, and maintaining his dignity and grace as well as hers. This way of loving, of showing up, was reflected back in his life by those who surrounded him, by his children, and by his friends. In the last year of his life, a group of friends who knew him, Byfriars, went to take him to lunch. But having communicated only with Dave and not at the time realizing how much this might need to be communicated to others, reports went around that he had been kidnapped, that men showed up and put him in a car. Sue had been left behind, and no one knew what was going on. With great love and a sense of play, Dave poured his life out into this world, and others poured it out back towards him. With sushi nights on Fridays, gin and tonics and crackers and cheese, regattas for the church, and the slow, steady work of another project. Dave brought a spirit of steady, quiet love to his life. As he entered hospice during those first few days, he repeated again and again, okay, 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 as if to say, yes, all could be steady and well if we are with the right people and we pour out our love and life into this place. Amen. One of Dave's great loves was making Easter eggs, dyeing Easter eggs, a flurry of color and joy, and hiding and finding Easter eggs. Even as an adult, the hunt and the discovery was a joy. Not all might feel this way, but he even liked it when he found them months later. And so it's in this spirit that I invite you to enjoy remembrances and memories from others who knew Dave. We'll hear from 3. May there be an Easter egg in there, some gem that you can turn over and say, "This is beautiful." So to begin, I'd like to invite the Reverend Richard Gilbert forward.
I just hope I don't lay an egg. David and Sue Schwardt I met in Ithaca at the Unitarian Church in 1970 at a memorial service, which I was giving as minister of that congregation. Little did I know that Sue was chair of this church's search committee. And so I met them at the service, didn't think much about it, but later received a call from Sue, who asked if I would be interested in being considered as minister for this church. Well, I wasn't thinking about leaving lovely Ithaca, but it might be interesting, and it really has been. So over 50 years later, I'm privileged to speak at David's memorial service. Some memories of a fine parishioner and human being. My wife Joyce remembers David as a member of a European trip she led many years ago in the 1990s to Western Europe. It was a self-administered trip, and so they drove themselves around on the tour. Of course, Dave was one of the drivers. He was a man of care and curiosity. My memories. In my mind's eye, I see him skiing down a wintry slope at Mount Tremblant. Oh, so cold in Canada. With chainsaw in hand, about to attack fallen trees on the church grounds. Beside Sue playing the violin, tinkering in a workshop on Canandaigua Lake, hoisting a beer at the Brighton with the Bifries, the infamous Bifries. But most of all, I see him smiling at some subtle joke that he has heard or told, or hear him in a burst of laughter that was unmistakable. Dave was a good but not great skier. I know because I skied with him. We always took about the same slopes. Some others tried to get us down the 3 triple diamond slopes, but could not do it. But we enjoyed it. We were irresponsible parents in those days because we often took our kids out of school to go on these trips. Some of you guiltily will remember. A typical day would go like this. We'd get up early in the morning, go skiing, find a ski class that we could accommodate, that would accommodate us. And then we would come back after a day's skiing, have a couple drinks perhaps, eat a great dinner, and then make our kids do their homework. That was the hard part. I don't know if they remember it, but I don't know how much homework was being done, but some of them at least did it. I'm not sure about my own. We had great fun skiing Hunt Hollow, Mount Tremblant, Mount Stowe, Mount Snow. Always a good time, always in laughter. Then there was Canandaigua Lake. This church in the olden times, the afore times as I call them now, we had a sunfish regatta. And we terrible sailors would race. It would be a terrible race, but we would have such great fun. And I recall David, life of the party often, showing us around Canandaigua Lake in his workshop. He was very good with tools, always. The Bi-Fries, a group of guys and gals who with varying skill sets gathered Friday mornings to do work around the church, ostensibly to save money, maybe, but also able to have fun always. They came with different levels of competence. One of the most competent, and often the leader, as you have heard already, was David Schwardt. Quite often, this hard-working crew would invite me, an honorary Bi-Fry, to have lunch with them at the Brighton restaurant over here on East Avenue. Quite a few well-deserved beers were hoisted, and oh, so carefully consumed. Since I retired in 2002, I had less contact with David, but I do recall some fine dinners with a group of old friends and parishioners. Elaine Jacobson periodically would gather us together, make a reservation at a restaurant, and we would have a meal together and enjoy the olden times. Sue and David were regulars. There we recall the good old days, and what helped me remember was David Schwardt, with a ready and often mischievous smile, with a very quirky, you might say, sense of humor, which prompted a recognizable, hearty laugh. David labored long and well. He was a tool of good steel that wore thin and broke at the work it was shaped to do. He was one of the foundation stones whose patient strength uphold the building of the world. He was a man. David, rest in peace. We can still hear your laughter.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Glenn Cook, Dave's friend and fellow Bi-Friar.
I think we should have talked before. There may be a little overlap here on what I have to say. Needless to say, I'll continue. Anyways, Nancy and I met Sue and Dave here at church many years ago. And since we seem to participate in many of the same activities, we came to enjoy their company and spent a lot of time with them. One of the activities that Dave excelled at was leading a volunteer group at church here called the Bi-Friars. For the benefit of those who are not members of this church, the Bi-Friars is a group of mostly retirees who come here every first and third Friday of every month, thus Bi-Friday or Bi-Fry for short, to do a variety of jobs or repairs around the church. Years ago, we, the members of the Bi-Friars, decided to give the leader of our group the august title of the High Bi-Fry Guy. Dave was our High Bi-Fry Guy for 8 years, from 2013 to 2021. This was a job that suited Dave well because he cared deeply for our church building and our property. He always came prepared with a list of jobs to be accomplished on those mornings. But the Bi-Friars is more than a work party. There is a social element, as Reverend Gilbert mentioned, to our activity. So before we started our work, each morning Dave would stop by at the Schutz Farm Market in Penfield, I think it's in Penfield, right? And on the way, and to He would bring in his favorite donut for us to share. He particularly liked the cinnamon-flavored sugar donut. He would always bring with him in his car at least 3 large boxes, toolboxes, so that we could have the right tools in order for us to do the job properly. His work ethic was, if you're going to fix something, you might as well fix it right the first time. Or fix it right the first time so you don't have to fix it again later. Dave was talented in many ways, but there are a couple of characteristics I noticed over the years. He listened more than he would talk, but had the knack of interjecting meaningful and often very humorous anecdotes to conversations. His quiet reserve was something I admired in Dave. I also detected a tendency to be a bit frugal. He would much rather fix something rather than replace something. And to illustrate that point, I can cite an example that I witnessed when we were on a trip to England with them and a group of friends here at church. There was a time when Joyce Gilbert would organize trips somewhere in this world where we would travel together. We would get around by renting a couple of vans and do the driving ourselves. On one such trip to England, Dave was driving one of the vans. Not only did he have to cope with driving on the wrong side of the road, many of the streets in England are very narrow. Such was the case when Dave was navigating a narrow road that had a high hedgerow on his left and oncoming traffic coming toward him on his right. He had drifted a bit to the left when the side view mirror was knocked off the van when he clipped the hedgerow. The conditions were such that we couldn't stop and go back to retrieve the side view mirror. We all reacted by saying something like, "Wow, that's going to be an expensive repair." Or, in an effort to console Dave, we would say something like, "Oh, well, we'll all share the cost." All the while, Dave never said a word. He just kept driving toward our destination, when all of a sudden he spotted a Ford dealership and turned onto the road that took us to the parts department. Dave calmly walked up to the counter and simply said, "I need a replacement side view mirror for the particular model of van that he was driving." A few minutes later, he came out with a satisfied smile on his face and proceeded to attach the new mirror. I can't remember how he did it, but the van must have had a toolkit on board. There was another curious behavior pattern that took us a while to figure out. You see, for several years, a small group of us would go to the Canal Town coffee roasters for coffee and a snack after church services. After an appropriate amount of social time here at church in the lobby, we would all look at each other, give that knowing nod, and leave for the coffee shop, which was only a couple of minutes away from church. Once there, we got our coffee and settled in for a nice social time. Invariably, Sue and Dave would arrive 10 or 15 minutes later. After this pattern seemed to become a habit, one of us would ask Sue and Dave, "Where have you been?" Our mild annoyance was tempered when we heard his response. It seemed that there was always someone that needed some help, or some minor last-minute problem at church had to be corrected before they could leave. Dave was always there to offer assistance before any personal considerations. In all the years I have known Dave, I never heard him utter an off-color word. He was always considerate of others, was always willing to help anyone in need. In short, the world would be in a far better place if we had more people like David Schwardt.
Thank you, Glenn. Finally, I'd like to invite Dave's son, Jeffrey, forward.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. And I want to thank both Richard and Glenn for the time we were able to share together in the last 3 weeks, aligning our redundant memories with our various details. And you will hear my version of some of these stories. From the perspective of a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, a college student, and now an engineer and scientist. So I made it this far, but I started in the Webster House and in this church. I was raised from birth in the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, so I know this building pretty well. Thank you, Reverend Sherry, for conducting the service. A special appreciation to my sister Judy, who helped organize this service and also looked after David and Sue for the last several years. It was an arduous task, and she was devoted to that as well. So pardon the redundancies, but there are several. David Noel Schwardt. Let me start with a few words about Dave's love affairs. Dave had a love for music. He was a lifelong violinist, including the Ithaca Community Orchestra, where he jeered and met his wife, Susan. Their love affair lasted for the rest of his life. Their 68th wedding anniversary was 3 weeks ago, June 6th. And Dave's community music career was also long-lasting until his early 80s as a member of the University of Rochester Campus Symphony. And speaking of love affairs, Dave loved to travel, especially to alpine ski resorts. For years, he hauled his family to Western New York ski resorts. You might remember Swain, Greek Peak, Song Mountain, Bristol Mountain, and of course, Hunt Hollow. Through these adventures, all of us in the Schwardt family became devoted downhill skiers. Dave and we traveled with the Unitarian Ski Club to mountains across North America and Europe from the 70s through the early 2000s. Dave finally hung up his skis at age 85. During one of my last conversations with him in April this year, Dave expressed, "I really miss skiing." Dave's love affair with travel also extended to camping trips. Dad regularly took us kids all over the country in our station wagon, towing a pop-up camper that served as our home away from home. Family traditions were born on these many trips. For example, campground Easter egg hunts. And a multi-generational favorite, pancake frisbee, with an overcooked giant disc made from excess pancake batter. Somehow there was always extra batter for the frisbee cake. Dave and Sue continued road tripping later in life, including motorhome tours all over the country, often featuring bird watching. Hardcore bird watching. Not just watching, listening. We learned to listen for the birds as well as watch. And that's ingrained in us. Their first motorhome was jointly owned by good friends Glenn and Suzanne Webster. This shared ownership situation followed a pattern in Dave's life. In the 1980s, Dave and close friend Doug Evans together bought a chainsaw that they shared for many years, then later shared a powerboat on Canandaigua Lake. I thought, how do you get along with your roommate? How do you get along with the guy who co-owns your boat? Anyway, here's something about Dave that affected many people around him and you've heard a bit about already, but it had a huge impact on me personally. Dave was a project guy. He devoted himself to projects of all kinds and strived to execute projects to completion with high quality. He would say, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And he would say that over and over through our lives. He would also say, work effort is either fast or half-assed. Probably the naughtiest thing he ever said. If a first attempt at a project failed, it may have gone ass over tea kettle, as he would say, or abbreviated A over TC. So some projects got scrapped or restarted. It was all good. Dave applied his get-it-done project philosophy in so many ways throughout his life. Dave's projects included photography, woodworking, especially wood turning, auto repair, do-it-yourself home improvements and additions, oversized vegetable gardening, practical jokes, some elaborate ones over the years, gag gifts, parties and events, Easter egg hunts, and Canandaigua cottage and barn building. And last but not least, the Bye Fry Guys. Dave also applied his project philosophy to his profession during his 30-plus years at Eastman Kodak as a mechanical engineer and manager in the Kodak Apparatus Division. His expertise was design and development of automated photographic film and print processing equipment, for which he was inventor on many U.S. patents, as Reverend Sherry mentioned. In the late 1960s, Dave led a technology team to implement onboard computers to control mechanical and chemical processes on these machines. This equipment could be found in labs and drugstores around the country and around the world, and expanded access for ordinary consumers to everyday photography. If you're old enough, you might remember dropping off photographic film at a drive-through photomat, spelled with an F, or sending film in a Kodak mailer, an envelope that you would send in, then receive precious photographic prints or slides. Remember slides? You would receive those a week or so later. Today, you can still find related self-serve photo equipment in the form of Kodak digital printing kiosks at pharmacies around the country. I use them myself. Throughout my own life, I start projects, large or small, and I catch myself thinking, how would Dad do this? Then I draw plans, make lists of essential project elements, constraints. Does the end result have to fit through a doorway or onto the back of a car? Little things you don't always anticipate, but he taught me those things as a young child in the workshop in the basement in Webster on the various projects that we started and mostly completed. Then I would try to carefully execute to achieve high quality with the end result. Akin to his devotion to music and playing violin, Dave loved to play the English language like a musical instrument, and he could improvise. Dave paid constant attention to the meaning of words and phrases. Conversations with Dave sometimes devolved into thoughtful and hilarious plays on words. He had a subtle, mischievous way of uttering puns, metaphors, and innuendo. Dave would often surprise both himself and others with his fluid delivery. Then the cackle, as Richard mentioned. Family dinners rarely ended without one or two clever puns from Dave, that would make his wife and children laugh or groan. For example, while serving apple pie for dessert, Dave might say, "May this peace be with you." But up bump. Yeah, geez. Along these lines, Grandpa Dave entertained his grandchildren by reciting funny old poems. One of the grandkids' favorites is the age-old folk poem that goes like this. Ladles and jelly spoons, I come before you to stand behind you, to tell you something I know nothing about. Next Thursday, which is Good Friday, there will be a ladies' meeting for men only. Admission is free. You can pay at the door. Take a seat. You can sit on the floor. That's all there is. There isn't any more. From my point of view, after 61 years of observation, Dave embodied the definition of Renaissance man. That is, a person who has broad interests and is knowledgeable, educated, or proficient in a wide range of fields. Dave was knowledgeable and proficient as a photographer, musician, engineer, and a master craftsman. And importantly, in his own humble way, Dave was a kind, loving, and gracious humanitarian. Humanitarian as a son, as a brother, a devoted husband, a parent, a coworker, a manager, a volunteer, a citizen, and ultimately as a patient until the end in May of this year. As you've heard alluded to, during the last months of Dave's life, his caregivers repeatedly told us how charmed they were by Dave's kindness, humor, and grace, even as his health declined. To wrap up this remembrance, I just can't stop reiterating Dave was a project guy, and in many ways, we are all subjects of his projects. In recent years, Dave took on the projects of caring for his oldest daughter, Ellen, and finally for wife, Susan, both of whom were challenged with health issues over many years. Dave was their devoted and committed advocate and caregiver. He never complained, maintained dignity and grace, and strived always to be fast, not half-assed. We will forever miss you, Dave. And you will forever be part of our lives. Thank you for listening.
Alongside that sense of playfulness with the Easter eggs, Dave carried an intentionality and sense of care about how he held projects. He couldn't stop being high-bi-fry guy until there was the next right person. And so as we hold the project of his life, it's with care and intention that those lessons are passed to us. I invite you to join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, scientifically measured in every BTU of heat, measured in the distance between birth and death. May we hear this life and hold it not like kids on a ski trip as homework to skip, but as an invitation. Because every project worth doing is worth overdoing, as Dave would say. May we be inspired by his example to live fully. May we make time and space for fun. May we strive to be like Dave skied, good, not great. May we listen more than we talk. May we seek repair with people as well as with things. May we love with care and curiosity. Such was Dave's life. Amen and blessed be. Thank you all for spending this time with us this afternoon, and I hope you'll join us for a reception in the Susan B. Anthony Lounge afterward for sharing stories, for laughter, for good puns if you have them. And we'll close with, for those who'd like to stay, with special music written by our band leader and bassist, John Randall, for the passing of his mother. As our time comes to a close, I'll extinguish our chalice. And in doing so, I want to acknowledge that though the energy and warmth of Dave's life remains, there is something that changes. Just as the light of his life danced across this earth, as we say goodbye, we know too that there is something missing. We carry this flame in our hearts. We go out from this time with our memories. And may his legacy, may that be an eternal spark in the lives that he touched. May we be the difference that he made. Amen.